We begin tonight with breaking news that could reshape the geopolitical landscape of the entire Middle East. According to a bombshell exclusive report from Axios, the White House believes it is on the verge of a historic agreement with Iran, a one-page memorandum of understanding that would formally end the current state of war and set the framework for detailed nuclear negotiations. The report, confirmed by two U.S. officials and two independent sources briefed on the matter, describes a 14-point document being quietly negotiated between Trump's envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and senior Iranian officials, both directly and through intermediaries. This comes hours after President Trump announced he would pause Project Freedom, the recently launched U.S. military operation in the Strait of Hormuz, a decision the administration now says was driven by genuine progress in back-channel diplomacy. The question tonight is not just whether a deal is possible. The question is, what kind of deal? At what cost? And can it hold? To understand what is happening right now, we must understand the full arc of history that brought us to this moment. The United States and Iran have been locked in a complex, often violent relationship for nearly 5 decades, ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution swept away the American-backed Shah and replaced him with Ayatollah Khomeini's fiercely anti-Western theocracy. But the nuclear question, the specific existential fear that Iran could one day acquire a nuclear weapon, has dominated U.S. foreign policy in the region for over 2 decades. In 2015, the Obama administration, together with the P5+1 nations, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany, negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the JCPOA. The deal was a landmark achievement of multilateral diplomacy. Under its terms, Iran agreed to dismantle large portions of its nuclear infrastructure, shipping out 25,000 pounds of enriched uranium, destroying 2/3 of its centrifuges, and filling its heavy water reactor with concrete. In exchange, the world lifted crushing economic sanctions. At the time of the deal, Iran's breakout time, the period it would take to produce enough fissile material for a single nuclear weapon, was estimated at 2 to 3 months. The JCPOA extended that window to at least 12 months and placed unprecedented monitoring mechanisms in place. International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors were given continuous access to Iran's declared nuclear facilities and the authority to demand access to any suspicious location in the country. But then came 2018. President Trump, in his first term, withdrew the United States from the JCPOA, calling it the worst deal ever, arguing it merely delayed rather than permanently ended Iran's nuclear ambitions. Maximum pressure sanctions were reimposed. Iran's economy contracted sharply, and gradually Iran began to push back, exceeding enrichment caps, installing advanced centrifuges, and expanding its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. By early 2025, the IAEA reported that Iran had accumulated 275 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, dangerously close to the 90% threshold needed for weapons-grade material. By May 2025, that figure had grown to over 400 kilograms. Iran's breakout time had effectively collapsed back to just weeks. The clock was ticking. When Trump returned to office in January 2025, his administration initially pursued a diplomatic track. U.S. and Iranian diplomats met for the first time in nearly 3 years on April 12, 2025, in Oman, a quiet, neutral Gulf state known for its role as a diplomatic back-channel between Washington and Tehran. 5 rounds of indirect talks followed in April and May 2025. Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff set an ambitious target: finalize a deal within 60 days. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi described the talks as potentially productive, but emphasized that deep mistrust remained on both sides. The talks collapsed. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched a massive military operation against Iran, targeting military sites, nuclear facilities, and regime infrastructure. The United States, which initially claimed non-involvement, quickly aligned itself with Israeli operations. In the days that followed, U.S. strikes specifically targeted Iran's nuclear program, narrowly designed, in the words of one official, to destroy or severely degrade Iran's nuclear capability. Iran retaliated with waves of ballistic missiles aimed at Israel and, on June 23, struck the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, though no American casualties were reported. What came to be known as the 12-Day War ended when President Trump announced on June 24, 2025, that Israel and Iran would cease hostilities. But the war did not resolve the nuclear question. It merely changed the terrain on which that question would be answered. A ceasefire, however fragile, held through the summer and fall of 2025, but the underlying conditions never truly stabilized. Iran's internal situation grew more volatile. Domestic protests erupted, and the regime responded with brutal suppression. The Trump administration, watching from Washington, began building up U.S. military assets near Iran from late December 2025 onward. Then, on February 28, 2026, U.S. and Israeli forces began a new phase of strikes, dubbed Operation Epic Fury by Washington and Operation Roaring Lion by Israel. The stated objective this time was broader: to degrade Iran's conventional military capabilities. The missiles, the drones, the power projection tools that Tehran had used to threaten its neighbors and hold global shipping lanes hostage. In the weeks that followed, Iran's military infrastructure suffered severe damage. Its proxy networks across the region, in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, were disrupted. Its air defense systems were degraded. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, once the regime's most formidable instrument of regional power, lost significant capacity. By early May 2026, the regime in Tehran, still standing, still in power, found itself at a crossroads. Continue fighting a war it was gradually losing? Or seek terms? It was in this context, with Iran weakened, economically crippled, militarily degraded but not destroyed, that the Axios report emerged this evening. So what exactly is in this proposed Memorandum of Understanding? Based on what our sources have told us and what the Axios report describes, let us walk through the key provisions. First, a moratorium on nuclear enrichment. Iran would commit to suspending all uranium enrichment activities. Crucially, two sources briefed on the negotiations tell Axios that Iran may also agree to remove its stockpile of highly enriched uranium from the country entirely, with one option being transfer of the material directly to the United States. This has been a core U.S. demand. Tehran has rejected it repeatedly in the past. Its appearance in the current draft is, by any measure, significant. Second, underground nuclear facilities. The parties are discussing a clause under which Iran would commit not to operate any underground nuclear facilities, a direct response to fears that Tehran had been developing hardened, buried sites immune to aerial bombardment. Third, enhanced inspections. Iran would agree to a strengthened inspections regime, including snap inspections by UN nuclear monitors, a stricter framework than was in place under the original 2015 JCPOA. Fourth, sanctions relief and frozen funds. The United States would commit to gradually lifting economic sanctions imposed on Iran and releasing billions of dollars in Iranian funds currently frozen around the world. The release would be gradual, not a lump sum, and would be conditioned on Iran's compliance. Fifth, Strait of Hormuz. Both sides would lift restrictions on transit through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes. Iran has long held the threat of closing this strait as a geopolitical weapon. The deal would, at least temporarily, take that weapon off the table. Sixth, the 30-day clock. The MOU, if signed, would not be a final agreement. It would declare an end to the current state of war and launch a 30-day period of intensive negotiations toward a comprehensive deal. Those talks could be held in Islamabad or Geneva, according to sources. The critical caveat: nothing is final. The terms in the memo are contingent on a fuller agreement being reached. If those talks fail, the possibility of renewed military confrontation remains very much alive. As Secretary of State Marco Rubio said just yesterday, we don't have to have the actual agreement written in one day. Let us be clear about what is at stake here, both in terms of opportunity and risk. The opportunity is real. Iran at this moment is weaker than it has been in decades. Its military power projection capabilities have been substantially degraded. Its economy, battered by decades of sanctions and two recent wars, is in deep distress. Its regional proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, have all taken serious hits. The regime's domestic legitimacy is contested. This is, as former Ambassador Kurt Volker noted, potentially the best leverage window the United States has had in a generation to extract meaningful concessions from Tehran on the nuclear question. If a deal can be struck now, while Iran is at its most vulnerable, the terms are likely to be far more stringent than anything achievable in a period of Iranian strength. But the risks are also real. The most significant concern among conservative foreign policy analysts is the question of sanctions relief. Iran's economy is the primary lever of U.S. pressure. Once sanctions are lifted, even gradually, that leverage is difficult to restore. Oil revenues will begin flowing again. Frozen assets will be unlocked. The regime will have resources to spend on reconstruction, on its military, and yes, potentially on regional proxies and destabilizing activities. Critics point to the Obama-era JCPOA as a cautionary tale. Iran, they argue, used the sanctions relief granted under that deal to fund its network of militant groups across the region, contributing to wars in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and beyond. The Trump administration is aware of this risk. The proposed gradual, conditional sanctions relief is designed specifically to maintain leverage at each stage of the process. But the effectiveness of that mechanism depends entirely on American resolve to snap sanctions back if Iran violates the deal, and that resolve has historically proven difficult to sustain over time. The Strait of Hormuz pipeline proposal adds an interesting strategic dimension. Reports indicate the United States is backing a proposal to build a network of energy pipelines that would bypass the strait entirely, running oil and gas from Gulf Arab states to ports on the Arabian Sea and Mediterranean without passing through Iranian-controlled waters. If such infrastructure were constructed, Iran's single greatest remaining geopolitical card, its ability to threaten global energy supplies, would be neutralized permanently. This is a long-term play, not an immediate solution. But it signals that Washington is thinking beyond a simple deal. It is thinking about restructuring the strategic geography of the region in ways that reduce Iranian leverage at its root. Neither side in this negotiation is monolithic. Inside Iran, the government is deeply divided. Hardliners within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and among the supreme leaders' inner circle regard any agreement with America as a form of surrender, a capitulation that undermines the ideological foundations of the 1979 revolution. They have consistently argued that the United States cannot be trusted to honor its commitments, pointing to Trump's 2018 withdrawal from the JCPOA as proof. Foreign Minister Araghchi, the lead Iranian negotiator, is known to be cautious, experienced, and skeptical. He has publicly stated that conditions for effective nuclear talks are not yet fully in place. He has demanded that any agreement be fair and balanced, language that suggests Tehran will not accept terms widely perceived domestically as humiliating, even if the strategic logic of compromise is clear. The regime's survival calculus is complicated. Accepting a deal means some form of legitimacy for American military action, something the regime's ideological base will resist. Rejecting a deal means continued war, more economic pain, and the very real possibility of regime collapse. Inside the United States, the picture is equally complex. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz were reportedly divided on whether U.S. military force should be used against Iran at all. The intelligence community, including Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, has assessed that Iran is not currently building a nuclear weapon, even as its enrichment activities approach weapons-grade levels. Some in Washington will argue that this proposed deal is simply the JCPOA 2.0, marginally improved in its inspection language, but fundamentally repeating the same mistake of trading money for temporary constraints. Others will counter that, given the military reality on the ground. Iran degraded, not destroyed. Some form of negotiated framework is the only realistic path to preventing nuclear proliferation without an escalation to full-scale regime change. The honest answer, based on the information we have tonight, is marginally and conditionally. The proposed MOU appears to include stricter inspection language than the 2015 JCPOA. The demand that Iran remove its highly enriched uranium stockpile from the country, if it holds, is significantly more stringent than anything in the Obama-era agreement, which only required reduction of the stockpile. However, it still involves releasing frozen Iranian funds. It still involves easing economic pressure on a regime that has demonstrated repeatedly its willingness to use that economic oxygen to fund regional destabilization. And its durability depends entirely on what is negotiated in the 30-day window that follows. The Obama JCPOA took 2 full years of intensive work by hundreds of technical and legal experts to negotiate. A comprehensive agreement of that depth cannot be replicated in 30 days. What the MOU is really doing, if it succeeds, is buying time and creating a formal mechanism for more detailed negotiations. Nothing is done, as former Ambassador Volker reminded us tonight, until it is all done. A ceasefire is not a peace. A moratorium is not a permanent constraint. A memo is not a treaty. Tonight, the White House is waiting for Iran's response on several key points, expected within the next 48 hours. This is, by all accounts, the closest the parties have come to any form of agreement since the current war began. The path forward involves enormous complexity: Iran's internal divisions, America's post-election politics, the role of Israel, which has its own red lines on Iranian nuclear capability, the interests of Gulf Arab states, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, who are watching this negotiation with acute attention, the position of Russia and China, both of whom have deepened their ties with Tehran and will not welcome a deal that permanently excludes them from shaping the outcome, and above all else, the nuclear clock. Iran has demonstrated that it can enrich uranium rapidly. Its knowledge, its scientists, its centrifuge technology, none of these can be bombed away permanently. The only durable solution to the Iranian nuclear challenge is a political one. Whether this deal, this one-page document being quietly negotiated between Witkoff, Kushner, and Iranian officials, can serve as the foundation for that political solution, remains deeply uncertain. But tonight, at least, the guns are quiet. The diplomats are talking. And the possibility of a different kind of outcome, not perfect, not permanent, but better than continued war, is alive. We will continue to follow this story as it develops. This has been a special news analysis.